What if I told you that the very fact that you're watching this video now isn't a coincidence? Not because the algorithm chose you, but because your heart is ready to hear something it's been waiting for a long time. Many people will enter 2026 as just another year, but some, very few, will enter it transformed. If you feel lost for no clear reason, if you feel an inner pressure to change, if you feel like your life is about to shift without knowing how or when, then listen carefully. Because this message could explain why 2026 won't be an ordinary year for you. If this video found you now, it's not by chance, not a hazy chance, not a vague chance, but one of those precise moments when things fall into place perfectly, when your inner self is finally ready. You could have been somewhere else. Your thumb could have kept scrolling. Your mind could have sought yet another distraction to stifle what you've been feeling for far too long. But something held you back. Even if you don't yet know what. And that's often how it begins. Not with certainty. Not with a clear answer. But with a silent, almost imperceptible pull. Felt only by the heart. Perhaps you're tired. Not the kind of tiredness that disappears with sleep, but an inner, deep tiredness, as if your soul is carrying a weight no one can see. You get up, you move forward, you do what's expected of you. But deep down, something inside you is exhausted from existing without understanding why. Perhaps your heart is heavy, even when everything is fine. People look at you and think you have no reason to feel bad. You smile, you function, you stand tall. But they don't know what you feel when you're alone with yourself. They don't know this inner silence that follows you, even in the noise. Or perhaps you feel something else. Something stranger, like an expectation without an object. As if something is approaching, without you being able to name it. A feeling that your life is about to change, but you don't know in what way. What you feel is not weakness. It's not pointless confusion. This is often the first sign that the soul is beginning to awaken, before the mind understands what's happening. There are phases in life when the soul receives a signal before logic follows. A subtle signal. An inner shiver, a new dissatisfaction, unlike anything you've ever known. You realize then that you're not the same person you were before, not because something extraordinary has happened, but because what once sufficed for you no longer does. The same distractions no longer soothe you, the same goals no longer motivate you, the same conversations seem empty, as if your heart is searching for a depth that your surroundings don't offer. And it's often at this precise moment that people begin to feel lost, because they think they've lost something, when in reality, they've moved beyond the previous version of themselves. This moment is uncomfortable, because you are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you will become. You are between two states, between two identities, between two paths. And this in-between is frightening, because it forces you to slow down, to reflect, to listen to what you used to run from. Many people stifle this moment. They fill the void with noise. They drown the inner call with activities, screens, superficial relationships. They prefer to return to what is familiar rather than confront what transforms them. But you are still here. You listen. You feel. And that changes everything. Because this precise moment, the one you may be experiencing right now, is often the starting point of the greatest inner transformations. Not those who see themselves on the outside, but those who redefine an entire life. It's the moment when the soul begins to ask questions the mind didn't dare formulate. The moment when the heart begins to reject the superficial. The moment when faith ceases to be a habit and becomes a living quest once more. And no, it's not comfortable. Because awakening never is. It shakes you. It disturbs you. It brings to light what has been dormant for far too long. But this discomfort isn't there to break you. It's there to guide you. And often, very often, the deepest change begins in silence, when no one around you notices anything yet, when even you doubt what you feel. It is precisely at this moment that something begins to take shape, slowly, inwardly, with a wisdom you do not yet control. And what is taking shape is not insignificant. Look at your journey, not the one people see, the one only you truly know. Look at all those doors that slammed shut without warning. Not gently, not with clear explanations, but brutally, as if someone had decided you no longer had the right to enter. Opportunities you had almost grasped. Projects you poured your energy, your hope, sometimes even your nightly prayers into, and then, nothing. Silence. Stand by. You tried to understand. You asked yourself what you had done wrong. You went over every detail in your mind, searching for the hidden mistake. But there wasn't always a mistake. Sometimes the closure isn't a punishment. It's a redirection. And then there were the relationships. The ones you were sincere with. Those relationships where you gave more than you received. Those where you thought loyalty alone would hold everything together. But despite your efforts, despite your patience, despite your intentions, they cracked. Some crumbled slowly. Others vanished overnight, leaving you with unanswered questions. Perhaps you thought you weren't enough, not good enough, not worthy enough, not important enough to be kept. But what you didn't see yet was that some people can't accompany you where your soul is meant to go. And the higher you rise inwardly, the more incompatible certain presences become. There are also those plans that never came to fruition. You had calculated everything, organized everything, visualized everything. On paper, it all made sense. But reality refused to follow the script. And that's when the pain deepened. Because you didn't just lose an outcome. You lost a projection of yourself, a version of your life you had already begun to love. You thought you were losing something, a future, stability, direction, but in reality, something was being taken away. Not to deprive you, but to protect you. Because some doors lead to places where your heart would have withered. Some relationships would have slowly pulled you away from your inner light. Some plans would have trapped you in a life that wasn't what your soul was capable of carrying. There are times when life becomes narrower, as if the space around you shrinks. Fewer options, less comfort, less certainty. Every step becomes heavier, every decision more exhausting. Each day demands an effort you didn't have to make before. And you ask yourself, why now? Why me? Why does everything seem harder when I'm sincerely trying to move forward? But this tightening isn't a crushing, it's a recentering. When something precious needs shaping, you don't leave it exposed to chaos. You isolate it. You work on it in a controlled space. You remove the excess. You cut away what's beyond. Your soul may be experiencing this very process, as if it were being prepared to carry something greater than you can imagine today. And for that, everything unnecessary must disappear, even if, in the moment, it hurts. Even if you don't yet understand what's happening. Some trials aren't there to test your outward strength. They're there to purify your inner self, to teach you to let go of what distracts you from what truly matters, to force you to look at what you've been avoiding. It's during these times that many give up deep down, not necessarily their faith, but their hope, their trust, their ability to believe that it all has meaning. They become bitter. They shut themselves off. They move forward without heart. But others begin to feel something different. A slow understanding, a strange peace amidst the hardship. Like a silent certainty that nothing is chaotic, even if everything seems unstable. And if you're still here, listening to these words, it's perhaps because you're one of those for whom trials are not an end, but an invisible preparation. Because what awaits you could not coexist with what you had before. Because the version of you that's emerging would have been stifled by the old structure of your life. And what few people realize is that the greatest transformations rarely begin with a visible rise. They begin with a loss, a reduction, a stripping away. And it's often just before everything starts to make sense that the pressure becomes most intense. Sometimes you wonder why you feel empty, not sad in the traditional sense, not necessarily hopeless, but hollow, as if something is missing without you being able to put your finger on it. You move forward in your life. You accomplish things others would envy. You reach some of the goals you set for yourself. And yet, when the silence returns, when night falls, when everything stops, this emptiness comes back with you. Successes no longer taste the same. Compliments slide off without truly touching your heart. Even moments meant to be happy leave you with a strange, almost guilty feeling. Why don't I feel what I should be feeling? So you ask yourself questions. You wonder if there's something wrong with you, if your faith has weakened, if your heart has hardened, if you've lost something along the way without realizing it. But listen to this carefully, deeply, slowly. This emptiness is not a spiritual illness. It's not an inner failure. It's not a sign that you're far from Allah. Very often, it's the opposite. This emptiness is a call, a quiet, yet insistent call. A call that comes neither through words nor spectacular events, but through a new dissatisfaction with everything superficial. Before, certain things were enough for you. The approval of others, the way people looked at you, material projects, the idea of success according to the standards around you. And now, all of that seems bland, like food that no longer nourishes. It's not because these things are inherently bad. It's because your heart has grown, and that He now refuses to be satiated by what is temporary. There is a precise moment in the spiritual life when the soul ceases to be satisfied with illusions, when it begins to crave depth, truth, presence. And this moment is often uncomfortable, because nothing around you changes immediately, but everything within begins to shift. You can be surrounded by people and feel profoundly alone, not because you lack relationships, but because few things around you still speak to your heart. You can be busy from morning till night, and yet feel an immense emptiness, because your soul is no longer nourished by activity. This emptiness often appears when the heart begins to understand, without words, that its true peace is not found in accumulation, but in alignment. Alignment between what you do and what your soul is truly meant to become. And that's where many people go wrong. They think this void must be filled as quickly as possible, so they fill it with more distractions, more relationships, more noise, more consumerism. But the more they fill it, the wider the void becomes. Because you can't feed a spiritual hunger with material things. This void isn't there to be filled. It's there to be heard. It forces you to slow down, to stop, to ask yourself questions you've been putting off for a long time. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Who am I really living for? What gives meaning to my efforts when no one is watching? And these questions are frightening, because they force us to confront certain inconsistencies, certain attachments, certain paths taken automatically rather than out of conviction. But this inner unease is often a sign that your heart is ready for something higher, something purer, something truer. When the heart is no longer satisfied by the superficial, it's not because it has become ungrateful. It's because it has tasted, even briefly, a depth it no longer wants to forget. And this depth is not found outside. It doesn't depend on people. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It begins within, in that strange feeling that all that is visible is no longer enough. This emptiness is sometimes the first step toward a more sincere relationship with Allah. Not a relationship based on habit or inheritance, but a living relationship, conscious, intimate, a relationship where you're no longer just looking for answers, but for transformation. And what's unsettling is that this emptiness often appears when you're least prepared to explain it to others. They'll tell you that you have everything, that you should be grateful, that you overthink things. But they don't feel what you feel when you're alone with your heart. They don't know that this emptiness is gently, sometimes painfully, pushing you toward a profound realignment of your life. And if you listen closely, this emptiness isn't silent. It whispers, it guides, it prepares. Because before receiving something greater, the heart must first detach itself from what burdens it. And this process is only just beginning. Why do you feel this need to change now, when nothing external is truly forcing you to? Why this strange feeling that staying the same tires you more than moving toward the unknown? This need doesn't stem from a trend. It doesn't stem from comparing yourself to others. It comes from a much quieter place, but one that is much more powerful. Why do certain habits suddenly bother you, even though they've been part of your daily life for years? Why is what seemed normal to you now starting to weigh on you internally? Things you used to do without thinking now leave a bitter taste. Not because they suddenly became bad, but because your heart can no longer pretend they are neutral. When the soul begins to ascend, it becomes more demanding. It is no longer content with merely surviving. It seeks coherence, purity of intention, clarity. Why is your heart becoming more sensitive to good and heavier in the face of evil? Why do certain words affect you more than before? Why do certain scenes, certain atmospheres, certain energies disturb you deeply when you used to tolerate them? This isn't a weakness, it's a new receptivity. Your heart is being recalibrated. What used to pass by without leaving a trace is beginning to leave an imprint. What was once commonplace is beginning to be weighed internally. And this sensitivity never arises by chance. It arises when the soul begins to be prepared to bear a responsibility greater than itself. Why do you no longer accept what you used to tolerate? Why do certain situations suddenly seem unjust, inconsistent, almost unbearable internally? Before, you would say, it's not a big deal. Now your heart says, it's no longer aligned. Before, you made compromises to preserve external peace. Now, those compromises create inner chaos. This change is confusing because it forces you to redefine your boundaries. Not social boundaries, spiritual boundaries. Why do you feel this inner tension, as if you're caught between two versions of yourself? One version that knows the old comfort, and another that feels the pull towards something more demanding, but more authentic. This tension is one of the most ignored, yet most powerful signs. It means you're no longer fully attached to who you were, but not yet fully rooted in who you're becoming. You're in a transitional zone, and every real transition creates tension. Why do some conversations suddenly tire you? Why do you feel the need for solitude? Not out of rejection of others, but out of inner necessity. Because your soul is beginning to filter. She sorts. She selects what truly nourishes her. Why do some ambitions lose their luster, even if they seem successful in the eyes of the world? Why does what you pursued so relentlessly now seem meaningless? Because not all successes nourish the soul. and your heart begins to discern the difference. Why do you sometimes feel an inner urgency without a date, without a clear deadline, but very real? As if something needs to be resolved, aligned, clarified. It's not anxiety, it's preparation. Some years don't come to continue the same story. They come to begin a new one. But this new story never begins on January 1st. It begins in the heart, months, sometimes years before. It begins with discomfort, questioning, loss of interest, silent changes that no one around you notices. Why do you feel like your perspective on life is shifting, even though your outward life remains the same? Why does this disconnect trouble you so much? Because the inner world always moves faster than the outer. Always. And when the inner world evolves, the outer world eventually follows, but never immediately. Why are some years felt before they are lived? Why do certain periods in your life call to you before they even arrive? Because spiritual time doesn't work like the calendar. It doesn't follow dates. It follows preparation. And what you're feeling today, this need for clarity, this heightened sensitivity, this rejection of inconsistency, this inner conflict, these are often signs that the coming year will be unlike any other. And not because it will be easy, but because it will be structuring. And when these signs appear, they never appear alone. Imagine wanting to carry a brighter light without strengthening the heart that contains it. Imagine being entrusted with something precious, immense, luminous, when your inner self is not yet prepared to receive it. This light would not illuminate you. It would burn you. In divine wisdom, nothing essential is given by chance. That which is lofty requires a solid vessel. That which is heavy requires a stable base. That which is luminous requires a purified heart. And this is where many go wrong. They think that difficulty means refusal, that waiting means forgetting, that slowness means abandonment. But often, slowness is not a standstill. It is an invisible work. Imagine raw metal. In its natural state, it is fragile, irregular, unable to withstand great pressure. To make it solid, it is heated. It is struck. It is polished. What is superfluous is removed. From the outside, this process resembles destruction. But in reality, it is preparation. Your heart may be experiencing exactly this. You feel frustration because you know you're capable of more, but that more hasn't yet arrived. And this waiting forces you to confront yourself. You feel forced patience because you are no longer in control. You do what you can, but some things are completely beyond your reach. And this powerlessness deeply disturbs you. You experience moments of loneliness, even when surrounded by others. Not because you are rejected, but because your inner journey is beginning to separate you from certain frequencies that no longer resonate with you. None of this is lost. Nothing is useless. Nothing is accidental. Every frustration dispels an illusion. Every waiting period corrects an intention. Every solitude brings you closer to what is essential. You are being emptied of what would weigh you down later. Because what awaits you is not light. Not in the sense of easy, but in the sense of carrying responsibility. Some blessings require emotional maturity. Others require inner stability. Still others require profound humility, without which they would become a source of pride. And if everything were to happen to you now, with the attachments you still have, with the fears you still carry, with the unhealed wounds, you wouldn't be able to bear it as you imagine. That's why some things are delayed. Not because you are unworthy, but because you are in a process of becoming. Look at how some of your old reactions have changed. Before, you would have exploded. Today, you remain silent. Before, you would have run away. Today, you endure. Even if you don't realize it, your heart is gaining depth. It's learning to trust without understanding everything. To move forward without guarantees. To stand tall even when nothing seems right. It's a silent transformation. No one celebrates it. No one applauds it. But it changes everything. Because what you're asking for, even without clearly stating it, requires a more stable version of yourself than yesterday. More sincere, more detached from the approval of others, more aware of your intentions. It's not your exterior that needs to change first. It's your core. If your heart isn't ready, even an advancement becomes a trial. Even a success becomes a distraction. Even an opening becomes a loss. So sometimes you're stopped. You're slowed down. You're isolated, not to punish you, but to bring you into alignment. You think you're behind, but inwardly, you're ahead. You think nothing is happening, but something essential is being built within you, in areas you never looked at before. Your relationship with time is changing. Your relationship with success is changing. Your relationship with people is changing. You're becoming more selective, more aware, more sensitive to what is true. And this sensitivity is not a weakness. It's a prerequisite for what's coming. Because what awaits you won't just require you to act. It will require you to be stable when things are changing, to be humble when doors open, to be grateful when the light arrives. And this ability isn't acquired in comfort. It's forged here. Now. In this phase, you don't fully understand, but that your soul recognizes. What you're experiencing now isn't a detour. It's a precise adjustment. And if you knew what this preparation makes possible, you wouldn't ask for it to end.
There are messages that arrive exactly when the heart is ready to hear them, not before, because they would be ignored, not after, because they would arrive too late. And this kind of message doesn't make a fuss. It doesn't impose itself. It doesn't force anything. It appears, simply, as if something inside you had whispered, "Stop here." If you are listening to this today, it is not to reassure yourself. It is not to tell you that everything will be all right without effort. It is not to lull you to spiritual sleep. It is to awaken you. Because something within you has reached a point of silent maturity. A point where distractions are no longer enough to stifle profound questions. A point where your heart begins to seek something other than superficial answers. You may not be able to explain what you're feeling, but you feel it. And that's enough. Something is changing in your relationship with life. Before, you reacted. Now, you observe more. You feel the weight of your choices, your intentions, your directions more intensely. Something is also changing in your relationship with yourself. You can no longer lie to yourself as easily as before. Certain inconsistencies disturb you internally. Certain habits leave you with a discomfort you can no longer ignore. And above all, something is changing in your relationship with your Creator. Not necessarily in visible ways. Not necessarily through more words or more gestures, but through a heightened awareness. An awareness that you are not alone. An awareness that each stage of your life is being observed, known, and measured with a wisdom that surpasses you. An awareness that your pain is not anonymous. This change is subtle. It doesn't always manifest as immediate peace. Sometimes it first manifests as inner turmoil. Because awakening doesn't begin with comfort. It begins with clarity. You begin to see more clearly certain things you've been avoiding. You begin to feel the true weight of certain past decisions.
You begin to understand that your life cannot remain on autopilot indefinitely. And this realization can be frightening, because it confronts you with an inner responsibility, and that of no longer living distractedly. If this video finds you now, it's not because you're perfect. It's not because you figured everything out. It's precisely because you're in transition. Your heart is in a particular state, neither asleep nor fully awake. A state where it is sensitive enough to feel, but still fragile enough to doubt. It is in this space that the deepest messages find their way. Not when everything is going well, not when everything is going wrong, but when the soul is open enough to listen. You could have come across this message a year ago. It would have done nothing. You would have heard the words without feeling them. You could come across it in a year. It would resonate differently or not at all. But today, your heart is on a particular frequency. A frequency where silence begins to speak louder than noise. A frequency where solitude sometimes becomes more nourishing than certain presences. A frequency where the soul begins to ask for truth, not entertainment. And this kind of transformation never begins in turmoil. It doesn't begin with dramatic announcements. It doesn't begin with visible changes. It begins in inner silence. In those moments when you are alone with your thoughts. When you look at your life and ask yourself, without saying it to anyone, is this really why I'm here? In those moments when your heart aches for no apparent reason. When you feel a strange longing for something you've never known. When you feel a special closeness to Allah without knowing how to explain it. This silence is sacred, but it is uncomfortable because it removes distractions, it removes excuses, it removes masks, and it leaves you face to face with who you truly are and who you could become. Many people run from this silence. They fill it at all costs. They don't want to hear what it has to say, but you, if you're still here, if you're still listening, if you're still feeling, perhaps it's because your soul has understood that this silence isn't empty, it's charged with realignments, charged with realizations, charged with inner decisions that haven't yet manifested outwardly. And what's aligning within you isn't insignificant, because this kind of message never arrives in isolation. It often arrives just before a time when clarity becomes inevitable, when some things will have to be chosen and others left behind. And as that moment approaches, the soul always receives subtle signs. Many people miss out on their greatest blessings, not because they weren't meant for them, but because they failed to recognize the preparation phase when it presented itself. They waited for obvious signs, doors opening without resistance, immediate answers, visible changes. But divine wisdom doesn't operate according to human impatience. So they misinterpreted their experiences. They mistook slowness for abandonment. They told themselves, if Allah truly wanted this for me, it would happen faster. Without realizing that some things are slow because they are precious. They mistook hardship for punishment. They believed that pain was necessarily a sign of rejection, when it was sometimes proof that profound work was underway. They mistook silence for absence. They thought that because they felt nothing, because nothing seemed to be moving, then nothing existed. But silence isn't empty. Silence is often charged with unseen decisions, charged with precise readjustments, charged with alignments the eye cannot yet perceive. The problem isn't that people give up. It's when they give up. They give up just before everything starts to make sense, just before the pieces fall into place, just before what was blurry begins to become clear. And that's why this phase is so spiritually dangerous, because it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like stagnation, but you're still here. You could have shut down. You could have become bitter. You could have stopped hoping inwardly, even while continuing to move forward outwardly. But you're still here. You're listening. You're feeling. And this detail changes everything. Because feeling, in a phase where many numb themselves, is already a sign of alignment. Your heart isn't switched off. It's on standby. It's observing. It's learning. It's preparing to recognize what's happening, even if it doesn't resemble what you had imagined. There are times when the soul finds itself at a silent crossroads. No signpost, no external voice, just an inner feeling that something is unfolding. In those moments, most people look back. They regret. They compare. They idolize the past because it's familiar. But you, even if you're afraid, keep looking ahead, not with certainty, but with sincerity. And this inner sincerity is rare, because it requires staying present in discomfort, accepting that you won't understand everything right away, moving forward without visible guarantees. What few people realize is that alignment never begins with an explosion. It begins with a tightening. Fewer distractions, fewer obvious relationships, fewer easy certainties, as if your life were becoming narrower, not to suffocate you, but to guide you precisely. Everything that disappears frees up space. Everything that is delayed teaches you patience. Everything that resists you forces you to clarify your intention. And while you think you're stuck, invisible elements are falling into place. Future encounters, opportunities that wouldn't have existed with the old version of you, responsibilities that demand the maturity you're currently acquiring. But these alignments aren't visible. They're felt. They manifest as heightened intuition, a newfound vigilance, a growing inability to ignore what's wrong, even when it's comfortable. That's why this phase is fragile, because you could decide to end it prematurely. You could return to what lulls you to sleep, to what reassures you without nourishing you, to what's easy but inconsistent with what your heart is becoming. And no one would blame you. No one would see the difference, except you. Because you would feel that inner disconnect, that subtle dissonance between what you're experiencing and what you know, deep down, you're meant to experience. What you are going through right now requires your full presence, not restlessness, not running away, presence. Be attentive to what your heart accepts and what it now rejects. Be honest about what aligns you and what throws you off course. Because what is aligning in your life doesn't shout, it whispers, and only those who slow down enough can hear it. If you miss this phase, you won't necessarily lose everything, but you could lose the essence of the moment. You might receive later what could have uplifted you now. You might understand too late what your heart was already trying to tell you. And that is why this moment is sacred, because it places you just before a tipping point, not yet visible, not yet measurable, but already real inside. Something is almost ready, but not quite. And in this in-between stage, every inner choice matters more than you realize. If this video touched something within you, if certain words resonated more deeply than expected, don't ignore them. Take a moment, breathe, and ask yourself honestly, what version of me is being born silently? Comment, I'm ready. If you feel something is changing within you, even if you can't explain it. Like this video to support this kind of spiritual reminder and allow this message to reach other hearts that need it. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey of reflection, centering, and inner guidance together. Sometimes, it all begins with simply listening and ends with a completely transformed life.